I had a buddy who, his name is David Cook. And David Cook was a troubled youth. One of the ones who time and time again would get in trouble. Time and time again was getting notes home during school. Time and time again would have parent-teacher conferences. And so what David's parents learned very early on was the question of to spank or not to spank was not a debate they were willing to have. They were going to spank. David got many, many spankings during his life. And one particular week in 4th grade, he got a phone call home 5 days in a row. Monday, a phone call. Tuesday, a phone call. Wednesday, a phone call. Thursday, a phone call. Friday, a phone call. And this phone call was one that made Mr. Cook, his dad, leave work early and come pick him up from school. As he went and picked David up, put him in the front seat, and as he drove, he said, "Why did I have to come pick you up?" David said, "Well, I was misbehaving. I was bad, and my teacher was fed up, and she sent me to the principal's office, and the principal didn't know what to do either, so he sent me home." Mr. Cook said, "When we get home, I want you to go immediately to your room, and you better not touch anything except your bed. I want you to sit there and think about what you've done." David thought, well, this is a little different. Usually we get home, and he tells me how I need to, how I need to not do that again, and I get my spanking accordingly, and then that's over. This time was a little different. So David got home, put his backpack down by the front door, and immediately went up to his room. And he sat in silence. 10 minutes went by, and his dad didn't come. 20 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by, 40 minutes went by. And about 45 minutes into him sitting alone silently in his room, his dad came in with a small TV stand, TV tray table, and put it in the center of his bedroom, and then laid on top of it a belt. Now, to this point, David had only ever been struck with hands. And so to look at a belt, he thought, oh my gosh, I've done it this time. This is it. My life will be ending soon. There's a belt. And David's dad left. And as he left, he said, I want you to seriously think about what you've done and contemplate what your punishment should be. 10 minutes went by again. 20 minutes went by again. 30 minutes went by. 45 minutes went by, an hour went by, and finally his dad came back into his room. And he said, son, you have to be punished. And David said that all the while he was waiting for that second hour, he was just thinking, oh my gosh, please, Lord, I'm so sorry. I will never do this again. Don't let him hit me with that thing. So David's dad said, are you sorry? David said, I am. I'm really, really sorry, Dad. I know that I've misbehaved. I know that I've disobeyed, and I'm so sorry. Please don't hit me with the belt. David's dad said, son, this is the punishment for your actions. He said, bend over. So David bent over, and he heard, crap! He didn't feel anything. Crap! And he thought, oh my gosh, my sincere apology has made me invincible to the belt. I don't feel a thing. A third, crack! He's starting to get a little worried now. He's like, man, if I would have just been sorry all these times, think of how many spankings I would not have felt. This would have been a great thing. Fourth one, crack! David's dad said, son, I want you to turn around. And David said he couldn't help but smiling as he turned around, thinking, I've just been beaten with a belt and I didn't feel a single one. And he turned, and his dad was sitting there, and his dad's leg was red, swollen, and bleeding. And he said, son, this is your punishment. This is what you deserved for your behavior, and instead I took it on my behalf. What you deserved, what you earned was punishment, and instead I took your spot. That was the last spanking David ever got, and the first time that he truly understood the gospel. Someone stepping in our place for our punishment. We're an interesting people. We love justice. We want to see justice. We love to watch NCIS and Law and Order and CSI and Criminal Minds, and we love that kind of stuff. We love cops because we love to watch justice be served. We love to see somebody get what they deserve. There is something so joyful about driving up I-95 and seeing someone go by me going 110 miles an hour and then 10 miles up the road seeing them pulled over on the side. They got what they deserved. The problem with justice is we want it when it applies to everybody else, but when it applies to us, we want mercy. We only want justice as far as it pertains to somebody else's punishment. When it comes to us, we want mercy. Which is why if I'm the one who's pulled over on I-95, I'm begging for a warning. Please don't give me a ticket. It's an interesting thing. And the big idea today is this: Jesus got what I deserved. Jesus stood in my place. Jesus got the punishment that I deserved. He sacrificed himself on my behalf. Jesus got what I deserved. Matthew chapter 27 and verse 15. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who was called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting in the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Do not have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." Barabbas was guilty. Here's what's happening in this text. So the chief priests and the priests, they want Jesus dead. They want him to be arrested, they want him to be tried, and ultimately they want him to die. And so they huddle together in the middle of the night. They all get on the same page, and after the Last Supper, they have Jesus arrested. Because they know that if they do this in the middle of the day, the 5,000 people who saw him and ate lunch with him, or the numerous people who had been following him around and celebrating him and seeing his miracles would not have wanted Jesus dead. But the chief priests did. And so they tried him amongst their own court, their own Sanhedrin, and said, "He's guilty, take him to Pilate." Pontius Pilate was a prefect, a governor of the area. So he had the authority to either condemn Jesus or set him free. And so in the verses just previous to this text, they bring Jesus to Pontius Pilate, and Pontius Pilate does an interview with him. And basically what Pilate finds out is he may be a little cuckoo, but he's not a bad guy. And so he goes out and he says, "All right, here's what we're going to do. Every year at the Passover, in order to keep good relations between the Jews and the Romans, I always let a prisoner go. So here's what I'll do. I'll pick the worst of the worst and pit him against Jesus, who's really not that bad, maybe a little weird, but not bad, and we'll let them decide." And so he goes out. And he says, "All right, so here's what we want. You got Barabbas or you got Jesus." We don't know much about Barabbas. Scripture doesn't tell us that much about Barabbas other than the fact that he was an insurrectionist. He was a rioter. Peter calls him a murderer. John calls him a riotous man. over and over and over again, the semblance that you get from Barabbas is that he's kind of crazy, and Barabbas wanted revolution. He was essentially a terrorist. He wanted to see Rome overthrown. He wanted to see Rome taken over, and so he was going to do it by physical way. Here's what every gospel says about Barabbas, though. Barabbas was guilty. You read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, every time they talk about Barabbas being guilty. He had been guilty, convicted of his crimes, guilty, sitting in a prison cell, ready to suffer a punishment. And so Pilate said, man, we can either put this guy here, who's obviously guilty, who's a murderer and a killer and a terrorist, against Jesus, who said some things that you don't like. And obviously, they're going to pick Jesus, right? Barabbas is guilty. It continues in verse 20. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus executed. Which of the two do you want me to release to you? Asked Pilate. Barabbas, they shouted. What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah? Pilate asked. They all answered, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, crucify him. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. All the people answered, his blood is on us and on our children. You've got Barabbas who is guilty and Jesus who is innocent. Jesus who has not committed any crime. He's not guilty of anything, deserves no punishment at all, pitted against a suffering, insufferable criminal. Pilate looks at the two and he goes, which one do you want me to release to you? And the crowd, in a raucous fashion, because as it's getting closer and closer to morning, they're growing and growing. And when you come upon a crowd that's thinking one way, automatically you start thinking that way too. And so they're saying, we want Barabbas. Give us the guilty one. And Pilate says, what do you want me to do with Jesus? They don't say arrest him. They don't say throw him in prison. They don't say take him away. They say kill him. Jesus was innocent. Barabbas is actually the first person who dies as a result, or who lives as a result of the gospel. This is the first time we have where Jesus literally takes the place of somebody who was guilty. This is the first time that this happened, and this is something that happened throughout all generations now. Barabbas couldn't offer Jesus anything. Jesus, man, have I got the deal of the century for you. I'm guilty. I'm an insurrectionist. They're probably going to kill me, but I've got this cushy, nice cell. You can come live here. They can go and put your feet in the stocks and chain you to a wall. That's pretty nice. You can eat gruel and get beaten by the Roman soldiers. Do you want to trade that spot? Barabbas has no bargaining chip. And yet Jesus willingly takes his spot. The text concludes like this. Verse 26, then Pilate released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. But Pilate's hands are tied here. Pilate's hands are in such a way that he goes, I have the ultimate authority. I could actually release this guy, but I'm a little bit scared of what this crowd might do. I'm a little bit worried about the riot that they might have happen afterward. So I don't really find this Jesus guy guilty, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and give them Barabbas because that's what they're asking for, and it's going to be on them instead. Here's the most interesting part of this story. I am Barabbas. I am guilty. And so are you. When it comes to what sin is anything that chooses itself over God. And so the Lord in the Old Testament puts out this big covenant for his people. There's a law that you have to follow in order to be made righteous. And the problem with the law is that I do not measure up to it. Let's just look at some of the 10 Commandments. Let me show you why I'm guilty. The first one, I'm the Lord your God, don't have any other gods before me. I'm 0 for 1 already because oftentimes I put myself before anybody else. Oftentimes I choose myself in my way, in my will, and I say, you know what, God? You are not as smart as me. I know you're the creator of the universe and all that, but let me just take this one. Let me show you how this should be handled. And automatically, I've made myself a God over God. The second one, don't have any idols. Let me show you what an idol looks like. A graven idol that I go to and I look at and I want to talk on and I want to see what other people are doing and got to check the Bears score. Yep, we're losing. Should have known that was coming. And I want to do this and that. And it's an idol. The third one. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Using God's name in vain. That can mean any number of things, but I will tell you in my life I am guilty. 0 for 3, right? Okay. All right, the fourth one. I got to have the fourth one down. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Holy is this word that means set apart. Do I actually keep my Sunday set apart? Or am I so worried about what's for lunch after this place? And am I going to be home to make sure that I get to the Bears game in time? That have I actually kept the Sabbath holy? The next one, number 5, honor your mother and father. Nope. Number 6, you shall not murder. All right, I got that one down, right? I haven't killed anybody yet. But the problem with that text is if you go back to the beginning of Matthew, Jesus says, even if you've hated somebody or been so angry with somebody that you could not stand them, you have committed murder in your heart. Whoops. The next one, adultery. All right, I haven't committed adultery, but Jesus again, right after that, talks about lust, and he says, if you've ever looked at a person with lust in your heart or desire for something in your heart that was for your own gain and your own glory, you have already committed adultery. This law thing is tough. Number 8, you shall not steal. I cheated on so many tests in high school. That's the only way I graduated. Number 9, you shall not give false testimony. Has anybody here ever looked at a thing on your computer that says, I have read and accept all the terms and conditions? How many of you have actually read all the terms and conditions? Yeah, we're all liars. Yeah, that one stings a little bit, doesn't it? Well, that's not that bad. It's a lie. Final one, do not covet your neighbor's things. The grass is always greener, right? God, why haven't you blessed me in that way? Why can't I have those things? God, you're not that good. And so here's the deal. I'm 0 for 10. And I'm 0 for 10 most days. And even if you're not 0 for 10, even if you've only committed the terms and conditions one, by the law's standards, you have broken the law, you are guilty, therefore we are all Barabbas. We stand guilty in terms of the law because we have not lived up to the standards that God set before us. And the wages of sin is death. If you sin, you die. That's how it works. Sin equals death. And so God looks at his people and he says, man, you guys are really bad at this covenant thing. You have not met the needs here. And so he makes a way. He brings something that is perfect and pure and holy into the world, his own self, his own son coming into the world who lives a perfect and holy life and goes 10 for 10. He says, not only have I not come to abolish the 10 Commandments, not only have I not come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill it. Jesus literally looked at the law and fulfilled everything it said and lived in such a way that he was perfect. And so if you're perfect and if you don't sin, you don't have to die. And Jesus willingly made his life available to us, died on a cross for our sins, and eventually rose again. And so as we sit in here today, let us remember that we are guilty. Let us remember that when it comes to the law, we do not stack up. But more importantly, let's remember who did. And Jesus came, lived, and willingly went to the cross. At any point, he could have said, nope, I'm out. Lord, come get me. Let's do this. Let's get this thing over. I'm done. And yet, as he's being compared to an insurrectionist criminal, Jesus stands and takes it. And from that spot, he's taken and he's flogged. Has a crown of thorns shoved on his head. He's hit with a stick. He's spat on. They beat him enough to where he has to have help carrying a cross up a hill. At the top of the hill, they lay him down on the cross, and they drive nails through his hands and through his feet. And they stand the cross up, and basically he suffocates until he dies. And he did that because he knew that he was the fulfillment of the law. He knew that he was the one who could be sacrificed on our behalf. And he willingly went there because he loves us that much. And we all know what happens, right? We're going to come in here on Sunday morning. We're going to celebrate that Jesus is risen. And we're going to be excited about it. And it's a cause for celebration. And we're going to have so much joy. But before we get to Sunday, let us not forget the sacrifice of Friday. Let us not forget a God who willingly measured up to everything and went to the cross on our behalf. See, Friday's sad. Friday's long. Friday is an emotional roller coaster when you think about who you are and who he is. So let us stay in the moment of Friday and anxiously await Sunday, because Sunday is coming. Amen.